before I tell you what I found in those woods, let me ask you something. Have you ever gone back to a place you loved as a child, only to feel, the moment you arrived, that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong? Not wrong in a way you could point to, not a broken window or a strange smell, but wrong the way a smile can be wrong, when the eyes behind it aren't smiling at all. That is exactly how it started for me. And by the time I understood what I was looking at, my oldest friend was already gone. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you happened in a real town, in a real forest, and some of the people involved are still out there. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know who is awake with me tonight. And if you have not already, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell on Neurofear HQ, because the stories we bring you are not from fiction. They come from the dark places people rarely talk about. The Tsuor-Achi, a town I grew up in, does not appear on most maps. It sits inside the borders of a national forest, one of the oldest and largest in the country, and if you did not already know it existed, you would drive right past the turnoff without a second thought. Most people do. That is, I think, part of the reason why certain things were allowed to continue there for so very long. I had been away for nearly 10 years. A decade is a long time. Long enough for people to age in ways that shock you. Long enough for the things you remember to blur at the edges until you are no longer sure what was real and what your younger mind invented to fill in the gaps. I told myself I stayed away because of work, because of family obligations, because life moves fast and the town moved slowly, and those two things were simply incompatible. But that was not the whole truth. The whole truth was something I had never been willing to face directly, a feeling I'd carried since the morning of our move, when I was 17 years old, and watching those forested hills disappear through the rear window of my parents' car in the rain. A feeling less like sadness and more like relief, like I had gotten out of something, like whatever had been building in those hills had decided on that particular morning to let me go. I had dreams sometimes about the forest. Nothing dramatic, no monsters, no screaming. Just me standing at the tree line as the sun went down, unable to remember whether I was walking in or walking out. I drove back in early autumn when the leaves were just beginning to turn. The kind of day that looks warm from inside a car, but bites your face the moment you step out. I had 3 days. 3 days to catch up with people I'd grown up with. People whose faces had begun to fade in my memory, the way old photographs do. The colors still there, but the details going soft. It did not go the way I had imagined. The people I remembered as bright and ambitious had aged in the particular way that happens when a place offers very little and takes quite a lot. I am not saying that to be cruel. I am saying it because it is the truth, and because by the end of the first evening I had arrived, I realized that the distance between what I remembered and what I was seeing was not the only thing making me uneasy. People were being careful around me, not unfriendly, not cold, but careful, like they were waiting to find out how much I already knew before they committed to saying anything real. Conversations had this quality of being conducted in a second language, technically correct, but missing something essential underneath. I noticed, in particular, that nobody mentioned Marcus. Marcus Webb had been my closest friend growing up. Not the kind of friend you drift toward because You happen to sit next to each other in class, the kind you choose deliberately because something in them matches something in you that you have not yet found words for. We had spent hundreds of hours together in those woods. He knew every trail, every creek crossing, every hidden overlook where the forest opened up and you could see for 20 miles on a clear day. He was the one who introduced me to those places. He made them feel safe. Marcus had not contacted me before my visit. He had not texted, had not called, had not sent so much as a message through anyone else. In a town that small, where the arrival of an old face was the kind of news that moved from house to house in under an hour, that silence was not an accident. I was staying with an old acquaintance named Reese, who I had not known especially well in school, but who had offered a spare room when I mentioned I was coming back. On the second night, after a long evening at the only bar in town that still served decent food, Reese finally told me what I had been sensing around the edges of every conversation since I arrived. Marcus had gone into the forest 6 days earlier. He had told his mother he might be gone for a while, and she should not worry. He had taken nothing with him. No camping gear, no change of clothes, no food that anyone could account for. His truck had been found parked at a trailhead 2 miles outside of town, and as of that evening, nobody had seen or heard from him since. I sat with that information for a long time before I spoke. "Why didn't anyone tell me, I asked. Reese looked uncomfortable. "People figured maybe you'd heard, and then when it was clear you hadn't, nobody wanted to be the one to ruin your visit. You know how it is." I did know how it was. That was exactly the problem. They declared Marcus Webb officially missing the following morning. The county sheriff, a man named Doyle, who had taken over the position from his predecessor about 4 years earlier, organized volunteer search teams to comb the area around the trailhead where Marcus's truck had been found. I signed up before I had fully processed what I was doing. This was Marcus, the person who had taught me how to read a topographic map and how to identify a cottonmouth by the way it held its head above water, and how to find north without a compass on an overcast day. The person who, when I was 16 and going through the worst year of my life, had driven an hour each way to sit with me in silence because he understood that sometimes silence was the only thing that helped. I could not get back in my car and drive away, not yet. The morning was gray and cold, that particular kind of autumn cold that gets into your joints and stays there. More than 30 people had gathered at the trailhead by the time the sheriff's deputies arrived to organize us into search teams. I recognized many of them, old classmates, neighbors, people who had taught us in Sunday school or coached us in youth leagues. The sight of them all there, older and quieter and more serious than the people I remembered, created a strange doubling effect, like being in 2 times at once. I ended up in a group led by a deputy who'd transferred in from another county 3 years earlier. His name was Garrett, and he was clearly competent in a procedural way. He knew the right terminology and the right formation and the right things to say into a radio. But he had never walked these particular hills before, and it showed. He read the terrain the way someone reads a foreign language they learned from a textbook, accurately, but without instinct. The person assigned to walk directly beside me in the search line was someone I had not expected to see. Her name was Nora Stiles. In school, she and I had not been close. She had been Marcus's neighbor growing up, and there had always been something slightly guarded in the way she looked at me, as though she was reserving judgment on some quality she had not yet decided about. She looked at me the same way now, 10 years later. "I didn't think you'd come back for this," she said, not unkindly, just observationally. "He's my friend?" I said. She nodded once, like that settled something, and we moved into the trees. The forest was quiet in the way that feels less like peace and more like held breath. I had been in these woods hundreds of times as a teenager, and I knew the difference between normal quiet and this particular stillness that meant the birds had stopped, and the squirrels had gone to ground, and even the wind had decided to stay out of it. I recognized landmarks as we walked. A particular rock formation that jutted from the hillside like the prow of a ship. A stand of hemlocks so old and dense, the light barely reached the ground beneath them. A dry creek bed we used to jump across on dares in the summer, now filled with dead leaves. It was beside that creek bed that I saw her, a young woman standing approximately 30 feet off to my right. She was not wearing a search vest. She was not calling Marcus's name. She was simply standing there in the shadow of a large beech tree, watching our line pass. She wore clothing that was wrong for the season, a cotton dress, short sleeves, no jacket, and wrong for the decade. In some way I could not immediately articulate, as if she had stepped out of a photograph from 30 years ago. I turned to look directly at her, and she was gone. Not gone the way a person goes when they step behind a tree. Gone the way a reflection goes when you shift your angle. There and then, not there, with no movement in between. I stopped walking. This put me out of formation, which brought Deputy Garrett jogging over with the particular expression of someone whose patience has been stretched beyond what they consider reasonable. He told me in very direct language that if I couldn't maintain my position in the line, I would be escorted out of the search area and not permitted to return. Nora said nothing, but I caught her watching me from the corner of her eye. During a break at midday, she crouched beside me and spoke in a low voice. "You saw something," she said, not a question. I described the woman by the beech tree. Nora listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "There are stories," she said carefully, "old ones, about this forest. Did Marcus ever tell you about the Hollow people?" He had not, or if he had, I had not remembered. The name, however, sent something cold moving through my chest. "They go by other names in other places," Nora continued, keeping her voice just above a whisper. "But around here, that is what people have called them for as long as anyone can remember. They are supposed to be, I don't know, old. Very old. They live underground and they come up at night and they study people. They mimic them. They learn to look like them and sound like them, and after a while, nobody can tell the difference." I stared at her. "Nora, you sound like you believe this." She met my eyes steadily. "Marcus believed it. He told me about 2 weeks before he disappeared, that he thought he had been approached by one when he was very young, that it had followed him ever since, that the person he had become, the person everyone in this town thought they knew, was not entirely him." Before I could respond, Deputy Garrett announced we were back in formation. None of the search teams found any sign of Marcus Webb that day. No equipment, no footprints in the soft soil near the creek beds. No response to the calls that echoed through the trees every few minutes. By late afternoon, the searchers were tired and cold, and Deputy Garrett was radioing in updates that had a progressively grim quality. It was Nora who first went off script. She fell into step beside me near the end of the day's search and said quietly that she knew a place she thought we should check, a place that did not appear on any official trail map, and that she had only found because Marcus had shown it to her years earlier. He had called it the Low Place. She had never been entirely sure what he meant by that, whether it was a physical description or something else. Deputy Garrett had already sent us back toward the trailhead when Nora and I split off. The path she led me down was not a trail in any formal sense. It was more like a seam in the forest, a way through the undergrowth that suggested use without ever quite proving it. As we descended, the light changed. This is difficult to describe, but I will try. It was not simply that the canopy was thicker, though it was. It was that the quality of the light itself seemed altered, flatter, less directional, as if it had been filtered through something that absorbed certain frequencies. The air was different too, damp and cold, and with a faint mineral smell beneath it like wet stone, like the inside of a well. We were about 20 minutes below the official trail when we found the opening. It was not a cave in any dramatic sense. There was no yawning mouth, no Gothic arch of rock. It was simply a gap between two large limestone slabs, roughly the width of a person's shoulders, with a darkness beyond it that went further down than my eyes could follow. The grass around it had been worn away to bare earth, not by weather, by footsteps, and on the limestone surface above it, scratched into the rock with something small and sharp, was a row of figures, stylized, childlike, their arms raised above their heads. They might have been dancing. Their fingers, if you looked closely, were longer than they should have been. Nora made a sound beside me. Not quite a word, not quite a gasp. I looked where she was looking. Someone was watching us from the tree line. Then 2 people. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the shadows beneath the hemlocks, 4. They were dressed in ordinary clothing, jeans, jackets, boots, but something about their posture was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, slightly wrong. The way a drawing of a human figure is wrong when the proportions are almost right, but not quite. The way they stood was almost the way a person stands, but not exactly, as if they had observed standing rather than learned it from the inside. One of them was the woman I had seen by the beech tree that morning. "We need to move," I said. "I know," said Nora. We did not run because running triggers pursuit in things that hunt. We walked quickly, deliberately, back up the seam in the forest toward the main trail. I did not look back, but I listened. And what I heard behind us was almost nothing. Almost. There was a sound like the movement of something large through undergrowth, but without the snapping of branches that such movement should have produced. We made it back to the main trail. We made it back to the trailhead. We did not speak until we were sitting in my rental car with the doors locked and the engine running. "What were they?" I asked, though I was not sure I wanted an answer. "I think," Nora said slowly, "that they were looking for Marcus, or looking for us now that we'd been down there, or both." She took out her phone and showed me something. A series of photographs, taken at night, blurry and dark and shot from what looked like an upstairs window. In each one, a figure stood in the street below, looking up. The figure was different in each photo, different height, different clothing. But there was a similarity in the posture. That almost right, Not quite right quality. How long has this been happening? I asked. Since Marcus disappeared, she said. Maybe before. I think he knew it was coming. I think that's why he went into the forest before they came to town. Maybe he thought if he led them away from the people he cared about, it would be enough. Her voice was very steady. I had the feeling she had been rehearsing this for days, holding it together by force of will because there was no one she could say it to who would believe her. He protected everyone, I said, and felt the weight of it settle. The second day of the search produced a result. Marcus Webb was found, or something that wore his face was found, just before noon, approximately 1.5 miles from where his truck was parked. He was dehydrated, disoriented, and barely able to walk. The deputy who located him described him as confused and unresponsive to questions. He was transported by ambulance to the county medical center. The search was called off. The volunteers who had gathered dispersed. People posted things on the local community page saying how glad they were that Marcus was safe and adding little heart emojis. And I read each one of those posts with something cold pooling in my stomach. Because I had known Marcus Webb for 15 years. I had spent more time with him than I had spent with most of my family. I knew how he moved and how he laughed and the particular way he paused before saying something he thought might upset you. A small inward breath, a slight tilt of the head. The person I visited in the hospital room that afternoon moved wrong, breathed wrong, paused in the wrong places, and did not pause in the right ones. He looked at me with Marcus's eyes, which were the right shade of dark brown, which crinkled at the corners exactly as I remembered. And he said Marcus's name for his mother, and made Marcus's gesture of running one hand across the back of his neck. And if I had not been paying the precise kind of attention that Nora's story had prepared me to pay, I might have believed it. But underneath the performance, something was watching me, measuring me, deciding something. I said very little. I said I was glad he was safe. I said I was leaving the next morning. I smiled in what I hoped was a normal way, and I left. Nora was waiting in the hospital parking lot. That wasn't him, I said. No, she agreed. His mother doesn't know. No, and we can't tell her. You understand that, right? We have no proof. And if they know what we know, she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. We sat in my car in the parking lot of a small hospital in a national forest and tried to figure out what a person does with information like this. Marcus Webb was somewhere underground in those hills. He was probably alive. I held on to that because Nora had said the hollow people kept their, I do not know what word to use, their subjects alive. They needed the original nearby to refresh the performance, to update the details of a life as it continued. But we could not go back into the forest. Not during the day, and certainly not after dark. We could not go to the sheriff. We could not go to the press. We could not go anywhere that the thing wearing Marcus's face would not eventually follow. Go home, Nora said quietly. Leave tomorrow like you planned. Whatever this is, it has existed here for a very long time. They didn't take you before. Maybe they decided you weren't worth the exposure. But if you stay, if you push... I looked at her. What about you? A long pause. A slight tilt of her head. Not Marcus's gesture, her own. I've lived here my whole life, she said. I know how to be careful. Here is what I have been able to piece together in the months since I left. The stories about what lives in those woods go back further than the town itself. before the National Forest designation, before the first European settlers. People who lived near those hills described the same thing in different language. Figures seen at the edge of firelight. Voices that sounded like family members calling from the wrong direction. People who came back from the forest, different in ways that took weeks or months to become undeniable. In the 1800s, there were 2 documented cases of people being held responsible for murders they could not remember committing, who described in the court records having lost time in the forest. One of them described waking underground in the dark, listening to something speak with his voice. The painted figures, carved and scratched onto stone throughout the forest, appear in 3 distinct styles that correspond, according to the state archaeologist's report, to 3 separate historical periods spanning several thousand years. Whoever made them was here for a very long time. Whatever made them may have been here longer. I do not know what the Hollow people are. I do not know if they began as something else and became what they are over centuries of practice, or if they have always been this way. I do not know if they feel anything, or if what they experience as they wear a borrowed life is only information, data collected and processed without any inner experience attached. I know that Marcus Webb's truck is still registered in his name. I know that the person living in his house, driving his truck, calling his mother every Sunday, is not him. I know because Nora sends me occasional brief messages, nothing that could be interpreted as alarming if someone else read them, that tell me she is still watching, still careful, still there. I know that 2 other people from my graduating class have disappeared into those woods in the past several years, and that both of them came back. Both of them came back changed. And I know this is the thing I sit with in the quiet hours, the thing I cannot put down, that whatever lives in those hills has been doing this for longer than the town, longer than the country, possibly longer than recorded history. And in all that time, it has never been exposed, never been photographed clearly, never been caught, which means either it is very careful or it has people or things that look like people in the right places to make sure that does not happen. I have not been back to that forest, but sometimes late at night I check the locks, and I think about the way that thing in the hospital room looked at me as I said goodbye. Not like a person watching a friend leave, like something filing away information it expects to need later, like it was already planning the reunion. You just made it through one of the most unsettling accounts we've ever featured on Neurofear HQ. If something about this story made the hairs on your arm stand up, if you felt that pull of recognition, that sense of something being just slightly wrong, trust that feeling. That instinct exists for a reason. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. I genuinely want to know. And if this is your first time here, welcome. Subscribe to Neurofear HQ and hit the bell so you never miss what we bring you next. We go to the places most people avoid. We ask the questions most people are afraid to ask. Because sometimes the most frightening thing of all is the truth hiding behind a familiar face. Stay alert. Stay aware. And we'll see you on the next one.